call the 2020 City of Eau Claire Board Review into session. Roll call.
Board Member Anderson.
Here.
Ingram. Here. Arnett.
Here.
Christopherson. Jansen.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Riebel. Here.
Okay. Entertain a motion for election of board chair and vice chair. I think we'll suggest a motion that Bill Peters be named board chair. And yeah, do we have anyone with interest in serving as vice chair? Mr. Jansen as vice chair. Entertain a motion to elect Bill Peters as chair of the board of review and Mr. Jansen as vice chair.
So moved.
Motion's been made. Second that. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, take a chair seat.
One use microphone. So just when you want to speak, push the button and turn green.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for your willingness to serve on the Board of Review this year for 2020. The next agenda item that we have is a review of board responsibilities by Deputy Clerk Mr. Holfer.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. I'm going to go through all of the basics of the board review. Certainly, if anyone has any questions, I may ask you to reserve those questions till I get through all of them, as there's a lot of things to cover, and I may answer some of your questions as we go. So, a few things to remember. First, kind of the three main rules of the board of review. First is that the assessor's valuation of property is presumed correct and is binding on the board of review in the absence of evidence showing it to be incorrect. Second, the board cannot change any value fixed by the assessor except upon evidence presented to it by persons under oath that substantiates a specific change in value. Third, the evidence must be factual in nature. It's not allowed to just be opinion. A difference in opinion without factual evidence to support it is not sufficient to overcome the presumption of correctness. The board of review is a quasi-judicial body. What does that mean? That means that members sit like judges and hear evidence. The board members are not allowed to have any ex parte contact, meaning you're not allowed to have any contact with any of the objectors outside of this hearing regarding any of the matters that are before you today. The board does not independently set a valuation. The board doesn't do over the work of the assessor. The board cannot substitute their judgment or idea of value for the assessor's opinion. The board cannot change any value fixed by the assessor except upon sworn testimony produced for that purpose. The board shall correct all errors in descriptions and computations. The board may subpoena witnesses if necessary. The board makes decisions based on evidence presented by persons under oath. This board is not an assessing body. The board's function is not one of valuation. The board is bound to accept the assessor's assessment as correct unless there is competent sworn testimony not contradicted by other evidence that proves the assessment to be incorrect. The board does not rule on whether a property has exempt status. And a taxpayer may appeal regardless of whether the assessor was allowed to make a property inspection. All meetings of the Board of Review are to be held in public, as we're doing here today, and open to all citizens at all times, and no closed sessions are held at any time for any purpose. Hearings are taped or recorded on a digital recorder by a court stenographer for the purposes of creating a record of the proceedings. This requires that all persons speaking at the hearing shall speak one at a time, clearly, and identify themselves so that an adequate and clear record of the proceedings is made. There may be times where either board members or objectors are asked to identify themselves so we have a clear record of who's speaking when. Hearings are conducted similar to proceedings in a court of law. Evidence is presented through sworn oral testimony with cross-examination of witnesses unless the board has previously granted permission for sworn written testimony. The methods of valuation. Recent sale of the subject property is the first and best manner of determining the valuation of a property. The sale must be an arm's length transaction in order to be used as evidence of value. So a sale that a person makes to their brother or between different corporate entities for tax purposes may not be considered an arm's length transaction. And the recent sale, in addition to being an arm's length transaction, also has to conform to sales of reasonable comparable properties. Arm's length sale means a sale between two parties, neither of whom are related to or under abnormal pressure from the other. After a recent sale if there's not a recent sale of property, the next thing you look at is whether there was a recent sale of comparable properties. If there are no recent sales of comparable properties, you look at other evidence of value. The best evidence of value will generally be either a recent sale price of the subject property, or if there isn't a recent sale of the subject property, recent sales of other comparable properties. The most probable price a property should bring in a competitive and open market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale, the buyer and seller each acting prudently and knowledgeably, and assuming the price is not affected by undue stimulus. Implicit in this definition is the consummation of a sale as of a specified date and the passing of title from seller to buyer under conditions where the following apply. The buyer and seller are typically motivated. Both parties are well informed or well advised and acting in what they consider to be their own best interests. A reasonable time is allowed for exposure to the open market. Payment is made in terms of cash and US dollars or in terms of financial arrangements comparable thereto. The price represents the normal consideration for the property sold unaffected by special or creative financing or sale concessions granted by anyone associated with the sale. Okay, and again, I'm going to circle back to the three main rules for the Board of Review, just as a reminder. First, the assessor's valuation of property is prima facie correct and is binding on the Board of Review in the absence of evidence showing it to be incorrect. It is the objector who has the burden to demonstrate that the valuation is incorrect. Second, the board cannot change any value fixed by the assessor except upon evidence presented to it by the persons under oath, and that evidence substantiates a change in value. And the evidence must be factual in nature, not just a matter of opinion. Now, as you hear each objection, when you get to the end, someone will make a motion to either grant or deny the objection. When you make a motion, and I will probably try to remind you when it comes to that time in each case too, you want to also, as part of your motion, list the reasons for granting or denying the motion. And so we want to have a record that shows this is the reasons why it was denied. So it's important that you take notes while each proceeding is going on, that you listen to what's provided by both the objector and the assessor. Certainly ask questions if there are things you don't understand. But again, I will probably give you a reminder when the time comes to make sure that your motion contains a list of reasons why you're voting to grant the motion or not. And with that said, I'll turn the time back over to the chair unless there are any questions from any members of the board.
Any questions for Attorney Hofer from any of the board members? Hearing none, then thank you, Mr. Hofer, for that presentation. Next item on our agenda is the confirmation of training. During the past 2 years, at least one member of the board must have attended a training session provided by the Department of Revenue. Ms. Riegel, could you recap who we have on the board to review the requirements of the training from last year?
Chair Peters attended training, and we filed the affidavit for that training on May 20th. And then myself, member Riegel, attended training on May 12th, 2020, and that affidavit has been filed as well.
Thank you, Ms. Riegel. Mr. Hofer, do we need to take action on that? No, it just stands in the record as presented. Correct. Thank you very much. Then moving on to agenda item number 6, which is a review of our adopted policies. The board of review previously has adopted 2 policies. One of those policies, and I believe you've received both of them. The first policy is in regard to allowing testimony that is written or by telephone. I would note for the board that policy on allowing testimony by written or telephonic is really only allows for it if it can't be done because the person is ill or disabled. As we all know, we're under some unusual times with the COVID-19 crisis, and just for the record, for this board review, the city is under an emergency order, and the city manager has ability under that order to make certain changes. And yesterday, we put in place an emergency order that would allow for telephonic or written testimony to be received by this board through the internet or the WebEx that we have available. So even though your policy isn't quite that broad, there is an executive order in place that allows for the testimony to be received this morning electronically for those that way. Any questions from the board on that? Any clarifications Mr. Hofer would like to make? Thank you. Then the second policy that we have is a policy that allows for certain cases to be waived, and in which case there would not be a hearing before the board of review. In such cases, just to really summarize it, the board can consider to waive as part of a stipulation between the property owner and the city of Eau Claire to resolve litigation. So that is really the only circumstance in which we would be considering a waiver of a case before the board of review, and that is when there's been a stipulation that's already previously been agreed to by the city of Eau Claire attorney office and the objector, and we will be considering some of those. Mr. Hofer, any clarification on that policy? No. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay, then moving on, the next agenda item that we have is acceptance of the assessment roll. And we will receive a presentation at this point from the city assessor of the assessment roll. Ms. Ender.
Do I need to be sworn?
We will swear the city assessor into the record before receiving the assessment.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony which you shall give in the matter now on hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My mic is automatically on, correct?
Yes.
Okay. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. These are a little bit challenging times. We sure appreciate it, whether you're virtually attending or in person. The assessor's office this year for the 2020 year conducted a maintenance assessment, which means that we updated values on those properties that either had a physical change to them, whether that was a positive or a negative increase, or there was some market condition around that type of property that required an adjustment. We sent out approximately 1,300 assessment notices to real property owners. The market in 2019 was very strong, especially in the residential market, and we are continuing to see that into 2020. The assessment role is kind of our baby in the assessor's office. We have spent 1 full year investigating, interviewing, viewing, measuring, listing to come up with these values. So we are very confident in this information. Just so you understand, this wasn't something in the last week or two that we pulled together. So we are very proud of the information that we have compiled for these values. The assessment roll as presented is both the Eau Claire and Chippewa County portions that lie in the city of Eau Claire. If you choose to accept the roll, it also includes 5 error corrections, which were personal property accounts that had changes after the fact, and 3 omitted properties that were discovered that did, they were also personal property that were in existence as of the 1st of 2019. So they were corrections to the 2019 roll after the fact. So if everybody's okay with that, I will go ahead and sign the roll and have it notarized by the city clerk.
Thank you, Ms. Ender. Just 2 quick things. I'd like to recognize that Ms. Christopherson has joined the meeting. Welcome. Good morning. And just 1 quick question for you. You may have addressed this, but just to confirm that any changes that were made in the open book and any corrections are today.
That is correct. There were, I believe, 11 adjustments to real property during open book hearing.
Great, thank you. Mr. Hope, would you like to take action on the assessment before she signs it? Or should she sign it and then take action? She signs it. Thank you. Okay, then, we have now before us the signed and notarized assessment roll as presented by Ms. Ender, the city assessor for the city of Eau Claire. And I would certainly entertain a motion to accept the 2020 assessment roll as presented by the city of Eau Claire. Christopherson. Is there any discussion on that motion? And all those in favor say aye.
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 That motion passes. Thank you very much. The next item of business then for us is to actually hear some appeals, and we do have appeals of the assessment before us. We have 5 that are being, considered for a waiver, and I would like to take those first. And so the first of those is property 153507-E at 4606 Gulf Road. The firm that is representing that is the Reinhardt firm, and we received that objection form on May 20th by email. So, Mr. Hofer, would you like to comment or help us through that waiver request?
Yes, we're going to recommend that you grant this waiver request. This is a matter that's in current litigation, in a current litigation posture. We believe it's in the best interest of all concerned for the saving of judicial resources to grant a waiver to this request.
Any questions for Mr. Hofer on this waiver request? Hearing none, then I would ask for a motion to waive the hearing before the Board of Review for property 15-3507-. Motion has been made by Ms. Christopherson. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hanson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. That motion has passed. The next consideration for waiver is property 15-305-7-I, and the property address is 4720 Gulf Road. Again, it's being represented by the Reinhardt firm. The objection form was received on May 20th, as well as the notice of intent, and they have requested a waiver. And again, Mr. Hofer present that waiver.
Yeah. Again, consistent with Board of Review policy, we are recommending that a waiver be granted. It will help facilitate the resolution or effective use of city and judicial resources in pending litigation. I would note, though, before we act on this one, I don't know if the chair asked for any opposed on the last one. It sounded like it was unanimous, but just make sure we have a complete record.
Thank you. I did hear that as unanimous, but that's a good reminder. Any questions for Mr. Hofer on the request of the waiver for 153507-9? Hearing no questions, then I would entertain a motion to waive parcel 15-3507-I for a hearing before the Board of Review. Moved by Mr. Arnett, seconded by Mr. Christopherson. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. Thank you very much. The next request for waiver is property 10-0535. The business owner is Goggins Phillips. It is located at 2717 Birch Street. And the Reinhardt firm is representing this request for a waiver. The notice of intent was received on April 20th, and the objection form was May 20th. Mr. Hofer.
The City Attorney's Office will also recommend granting waiver on this for this request, as it will, consistent with board policy, will facilitate the resolution or effective use of city and judicial resources.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Any questions for Mr. Hofer on this waiver request? Hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to waive property 15-2347-E
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I think we're still on 0535.
I'm sorry. Yes, 10-0525. Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Christopherson. Is there a second? Thank you. We have a second from Mr. Jansen. Any discussion on that motion? Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and I did hear Ms. Anderson say aye on that, so that motion passes unanimously. The fourth of the fifth or five requests for waiver that we have before us this morning is property 15-2347-E. This is located at 3007 Mall Drive, again represented by the Reinhardt firm. Notice of intent was received on April 20th, April 9th, 2020. The objection form on May 19th, 2020. Mr. Hofer.
City Attorney's Office recommends granting this waiver request as it is consistent with board policy that it will facilitate the resolution or effective use of city and or judicial resources.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Any questions for Mr. Hofer on this objection or this request for waiver? Hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to waive the hearing before the board of review this morning for property 15-2347-B. Motion by Mr. Christopherson, seconded by Mr. Arnett. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that motion passes. Final request for waiver this morning is for property 15-3507-C. And it is located at 4710 Gulf Road. The notice of intent was received on May 15, 2020. The objection form was received on the same day. Mr. Hofer.
The City Attorney's Office recommends granting waiver on this request as it is consistent with board policy that it will facilitate the resolution or effective use of city and judicial resources.
Any questions for Mr. Hofer? Hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to waive the hearing before the board of review this morning for property 15-3507-C. Motion by Mr. Arnett. Seconded by Ms. Engel. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you very much to the board of review for considering those waivers. We now move on to hearing of some other appeals that we have before us. And I would turn it over to Ms. People to read into the notice of taxpayer. But before we do that, just a reminder that each one of these hearings stands by itself as its own entity. It is appealed further in the process. And to that end, I would just like to confirm, because it is required that this hearing is on tape and electronically recorded. I'm just looking for a nod from the person in our booth that this is being recorded and accurately captured. Thank you very much. With that, Ms. Riepel, could you read the notice to the taxpayer of our first appeal this morning?
The board review wants you to understand that under state law, the board review is required to hold the valuation of your property to be correct, unless you by your testimony can show the assessor's valuation to be incorrect. In other words, the burden of proof is upon you as the taxpayer. Do you understand?
I was looking for the which case do you want to take up first?
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. That was not really very clear on that.
All right, so
Who do we want to take first and get them sworn in?
all right. Please So the first appeal we have is for parcel number 14-1284-G. The assessment, the land is assessed at $3,040,000. The improvements for $6,890,000. The total is $9,930,000. The property is located at 3210 North Claremont Avenue for Menards is the owner.
Okay, and we have somebody on the line and that's going to be presenting that. You know who that is? This is Cricket. Different.
Mr. Brenner.
Mr. Brenner. Got it. Okay. Mr. Brenner, are you with us this morning? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can. Very well. Thank you, sir. And thank you for joining us this morning. We are hearing your appeal of your assessment for property 14-1284-C. And why don't we start this with swearing you in for the record. So, Ms. Riepel, could you swear Mr. Brenner in for the record?
Mr. Brenner, do you solemnly swear that you are Nicholas Brenner and that the testimony which you shall give in the matter now on hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Brenner, just for the record, the Board of Review does want you to understand that under state law, the Board of Review is required to uphold the assessor's valuation of your property as being correct, unless you, by your testimony, can show that the assessor's valuation is incorrect. In other words, the burden of proof is upon you as the taxpayer. Do you understand that?
I do.
Thank you. Just a little bit of review of the process that we will use this morning. Mr. Brenner will present his case for his appeal to the property. The assessor then has the opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Brenner. The Board of Review may also ask questions of Mr. Brenner. Mr. Brenner then can bring witnesses if he would like in support of his case. And then the assessor can also bring questions of that witness as well as the Board of Review. Following that then, our city assessor will present the case for the city assessor's office. The taxpayer, in this case Mr. Brenner, has the right to ask questions of the city assessor. The Board of Review can also ask questions at that time of the assessor. Mr. Brenner then will be asked if he has any additional testimony. The assessor will be asked if they have any additional testimony. And then the taxpayer, represented by Mr. Brenner in this case, will summarize their case, as will the assessor. We will then close the testimony, and there will be a discussion of the Board of Review, and then a motion with action on the particular appeal that we have. Any questions on the process that will follow this morning? Then, Mr. Brenner, we would ask that you present your case, please.
Okay. I just want to just one question, clarification question. So there are 3 different parcels that we are appealing today. Do you want me to go through? The presentation is going to be essentially the same for most of them, since they're very similar properties. Do you want me to kind of address them all in one fair swoop, or do you want me to repeat myself when we get to the next parcel? What is the best method there?
Mr. Hofer, what is your recommendation for that, please?
I think our assessor intends to handle the first 2 together because of the similarities, and the third one separately. And so I'd recommend that you discuss the first 2 being the 3210 North Claremont address, parcel number 14-1284G, and then the parcel number 15-3504-B together, and then do that third one, 15-3504-E separately. Does that make sense?
That will work for me.
Yes, I understand the desire not to repeat yourself, and because those first two are similar, it probably makes sense to handle them together, although we'll have separate motions on each property when we get to that point.
Okay. All right, fair enough. So yeah, Nick Renner, real estate representative here from Menards. So we went through the new assessment for this year. A lot has changed in the last year and a half in terms of big box. I know there's a history on these two properties. We felt internally that based on the changes that we've seen here in the last year and a half, that the value of these properties have indeed gone down over time. In order to supplement that opinion, we did hire out a appraisal company, Valuation Services Inc., to conduct a new appraisal on these two properties. As you know, in Eau Claire, they are the west and the east side stores. So our appraiser went through and did a reevaluation on the properties based on current trends, based on recent sales that may or may not have been available in years past, to be able to come up with a valuation for these properties. So he did that, and he used the sales comparison approach, and utilized really three properties here in Wisconsin to come up with his conclusion for the valuation of these properties. Two were former Sam's Club. One was located in Madison on the west side. This is a property that is located right off the Outer Belt Freeway, right across the street from the mall. The other Sam's Club was located in West Allis, which is just outside the west side of the city limits of Milwaukee. And then he used actually a former Menards store that was sold just this past year, also in Madison on the east side. So going through these comps, he looked at the values that each came back on their sales. He went through and did some adjustments to those comps based on locations, mainly being that the Sam's Clubs both seem to be superior properties, mainly because of their locations. Being right outside of the main Milwaukee area, land and buildings tend to be much more expensive than here in Eau Claire. And then Madison, the west side of Madison, being the fact it's right off the outer belt, is actually a very prime real estate property, and he attributed some extra value because of that. Going through the sale of the Menards store, he thought was the best, and I would have to agree with him, would be the best comp for a store here in Eau Claire. Although Madison may be a little bit more expensive in terms of the real estate market than here in Eau Claire, the building is very similar because it was a Menards store. It might have been a little bit older, but the comp was very similar. So that being said, that building was a little bit smaller than the ones here in Eau Claire, about 161,000 square feet, a little bit more than that. The comp that sold at, it was an $8 million sale. It was about $49 a square foot. I think 49. I apologize here. $49.64 to be exact. So using that value, and because that building is so similar to what we have in Eau Claire, our appraisal stated that the value of the properties here in Eau Claire should be $50 a square foot, rounding up. You times that by the amount of square footage of these stores, which is 167,000, a little bit more than that. He rounded up a value of $8,400,000, which is significantly less than the $9,930,000 that the west side is appraised at, and also the $9,409,000 that the east store is appraised at. So that is really where we came, to this conclusion to object to the real estate value. Again, trends are always changing, and we feel that big box trends are going down. This appraisal points that out. This appraisal also points out the fact that vacancy in Eau Claire is relatively minor, but of the vacancy in Eau Claire, most of that is big box retail. You have a Sam's Club, no, sorry, you have a Shopko, you have a Mega, you have a Shopko up in Lake Hallie, although it's not the city of Eau Claire, it's in the same region. You have a Sears box that's vacant. Home Furniture moved, and I believe they just might have sold their old piece here. But then you also have a vacant Kmart that Hy-Vee bought but hasn't developed yet, so who really knows what's going on there. So with all that being said, the trend is that big box are being difficult to move. And we are seeing that in a decline of valuation, and I think this appraisal points that out, and that's why we did it, and that's why we produced it to you. So that's really essentially my presentation. I tried to keep it short and sweet. I'm here to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Mr. Brenner, if I could, just to be very clear for the record, as I understood, the East Side store is currently valued in the assessor's record for $9,409,000, and you are requesting that that be adjusted to $8,400,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the West Side store, I'm sorry, I missed the number for the current assessed value for the West Side store. 9 million.
I have 9,930,000.
Okay, and that your request is to adjust that West Side store from 9,930,000 down to 8,400,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. At this time, does the city assessor have any questions of Mr. Brenner? There are no questions for the city assessor to Mr. Brenner. Does the Board of Review have any questions for Mr. Brenner?
Yes, I have a question. Looking at the 3 comparable sales, you had mentioned that the sale of the Menards property was the best comp. And the question I have is the circumstances of that particular sale. I believe that's the one that sold for, was it 8,000? Excuse me, 8 million?
Correct.
Yes. How long was that on the market? And was it a vacated property?
I'm not quite sure how long it was on the market. I would say it was probably less than a year. And you cut out when you asked the second question, so I'm not quite sure what that was. Can you repeat that?
Was the property vacated? In other words, had Menard's business already moved out of the property when it was listed for sale?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, and any other questions from the Board of Review to Mr. Brenner? Hearing none, then, Mr. Brenner, do you have any other witnesses that you would like to have present on your behalf?
No, it's just me today.
Thank you. And then, I guess it would now be time to hear the case from the city assessor's office. You see, Ms. Schultz is coming to the podium, so good morning, Ms. Schultz.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony which you shall give in the matter now on hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good morning. I'm a little bit shorter than Doug here, so I'm going to pull this down.
Good morning.
My name is Alyssa Schultz. I'm the Deputy City Assessor here in Eau Claire. And you just heard the testimony from Nick Brenner on the 2 retail stores here in Eau Claire. Before I get into my case, I'd just like to share a little bit of background information that I have on both of the stores, since we've worked with them previously. So both the 3210 North Claremont Avenue and 3619 South Hastings Way, and then a rear lumber shed, which is another case that you'll hear right after these, had recently just been reduced in an assessed value for the years of 17, 18, and 19. We recently just settled that litigation 3 months ago. Prior to this litigation, these 3 properties were assessed at, and I'll read each one separately. 3210 North Claremont Avenue was at $10,085,000. We reduced this location to $9,409,000 for the past 3 years. Property 3619 South Hastings Way was assessed at for 17, 18, and 19, $11,765,000. We reduced that property for 17, 18, and 19 to $10,609,000. I won't address the rear lumber shed right now. I'll address how we reduced that one at the later case. The other thing that I would like to mention before I get into my case is in the packet that I had prepared for you, there is 3 documents. First one says the construction mortgage security agreement and fixture financing statement. Way towards the end, I would say it's about the last 4 pages at the end of your packet. Now, it's not really in my job to pick apart anyone's appraisal, but that's what we do. We have to make sure that the comps provided. Good.
We're good.
Okay. We have to make sure that the comps provided to us are indeed valid sales that we would also use here in Eau Claire. So the last 4 pages of your packet here is for the sale comp number 3 in the appraisal of this, in the 2 appraisals that Menards had provided for both of their retail stores. Sales comp 3, I'll pull up the address, is for what Nick Brenner had said was the most comparable to the stores here in Eau Claire. It was a vacated Menards store. Now, something that I have found in the last few years is that when Menards sells a property, they don't want another big box hardware store to move into it because it can be competition, in my opinion. And based on these last 4 documents, I would say this is not an arm's length sale transaction for the $8 million. I also spoke with the assessor of this municipality 2 days ago. They also deemed it not an arm's length sale. If you look at the construction mortgage information, this shows that Menards sold this property to the United Plumbers Union. They sold it for $8 million. The loan listed on this property is $9.5 million. Now, take into consideration it is a construction mortgage, so I'm sure that they are going to improve this big box store in some way, shape, or form. But with that being said, on this particular building, it's still saying the bank produced a loan and an appraisal for $9.5 million, not $8 million. If you go to the second page on the top, it says special warranty deed. This is a deed restriction that Menards puts on their properties when they sell them. If you go to the last paragraph on this page where it says start on the left, you can read the abundance of hardware stores, home improvement stores, or anything like a Menards location that is not allowed to conduct any business in this facility. And it also goes into page 2, which has the rest of the hardware and home improvement stores that are not allowed to buy this building and operate there. So in my opinion, using a sale that's restricted for how the grantee can use it is not an arm's length sale, because it's not available to how anyone would choose to use it. The other issue I have with the appraisal that Menards provided for both their stores, if you turn to page 8 in your packet, I had also spoke to the assessor of this municipality 2 days ago. It's for the Menards sales comp 1. It was a vacant Sam's Club. But in the appraisal, the sale price is $7,800,000. But in actual, the sale was $9,800,000. So when the appraisal was prepared, they were off by $2 million in the sale amount. So if we're using an appraisal that has incorrect comp information, I guess I would ask the board to look at the cost per square foot in a correct manner versus using an incorrect manner. Comp 8, where it's highlighted, you'll see the actual information for the sale. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay. So now I'll just present my case that I have. For the Menards West store, 3210 North Claremont Avenue, we have the property assessed at $9,930,000 for the 2020 assessed value. That was the reduced assessed value from the last few years. This is $58.50 per square foot. There's a picture of the store, and then I also have a location picture of the store right underneath it. The second building is what I consider Menards South. I know Menards refers to it as their east building. This building is assessed for 2020 at $9,409,000. The cost per square foot is $55.43 per square foot. Underneath it, you'll also have a picture and then a location below it. If you turn to page 3, these are 8 comps that I found in Wisconsin that I would consider comparable to both of the Menards retail locations. The first one, comp number 1, is West Beltline Highway, Madison. It was an Ashley Furniture that purchased the store. The square feet is also comparable to both of the retail stores for 155,000 square feet. The assessed value comes out to $59.35 per square foot. I also broke down what the overall rate was used on that sale, and if it was occupied or unoccupied. All the sales that I'll use in my comps are occupied sales. None of them will be unoccupied. Sale comp 2 was 3049 South Oaks Road. I'm not going to get that location right. It's a Walmart. Sold for $17,500,000. This is a June 2019 sale. It's also very comparable in size to a Menard. Sold for $85.37 per square foot. It was also occupied. Sale comp 3, 1515 West Paradise Drive in West Bend. It's another Walmart. $17 million it sold for. Sold in June 2019. Comparable square foot and size. Sold for $82.93 per square foot. Sale comp 4, 401 East Capitol Drive, Milwaukee. It's another Walmart. $10.8 million. Sold in December 2018. A little bit smaller in size compared to Menards, but still over 100,000 square feet. This one sold for $98.45 per square foot. Sale comp 5, 1175 West Winneconne, Neenah, Wisconsin. The Kohl sold for $10 million. Square foot and size is slightly smaller, 86,854 square feet. Still considered a big box store. Sold for $115.14 per square foot. Sales comp 6, 2101 West Broadway, Monona, Wisconsin. It was a Shopko, sold for $7,500,000. This was a September 2015 sale. Sold for $76.58 per square foot. Sales comp 7, 320 County Road O, Rice Lake, Wisconsin. It was a Shopko. It sold for $6,300,000. That was the December 2017 sale. Sold for $71.59. And sales comp 8 is N77 West 14435 West Appleton. That was a Menominee Falls sale. It was a pick and save for $24.3 million. Sold in July 2018. $234.53 per square foot. Now I know there's highs and lows in both of these, in all 8 of these sales. So at the bottom of this grid, I have the bracketed square foot cost, the median square foot cost, and the average square foot cost. I tend to rather use a median because an average is going to be skewed by a high and low value. So if you go on to the next page, it would be page 4. Using the information that I just went through for the sales comp, the West Side Store, North Claremont, should be assessed at a ratioed value of a little less than $80 per square foot. It's currently assessed at $58.50 per square foot. I feel a sales comparison value should be $12,357,000. For the store 3619 South Hastings Way, the sales comp should also be just a little less than $80 per square foot. And the assessed value should be $12,357,000. Also, that's a ratioed value. Now, take into consideration Menards owns all of their stores, or probably 99.9% of all their stores. They don't lease them. So using the information for the sales comps, I used stores that were leased to get a good idea if the property was to receive income from another source, what it would receive at a square foot cost. Now, running a sales or an income approach on both of the locations, an estimated rent for a big box store of this size would be about $7 a square foot. Running through all that information, I know it gets very confusing, but what I did is I gave it a 5% vacancy rate. Now, ideally, when you're looking at a big box store, of a Walmart, of Home Depot, Lowe's, those types of stores shouldn't really have much of a vacancy rate at all because they sign leases for 15, 20, 30 years. So in reality, they're not going to go vacant for a very, very, very long time, and that investor will have an income stream for that amount of period. But in a good faith effort, I still wanted to give a vacancy rate. So I gave a 5% vacancy rate there. I also gave a 10% expense ratio. I used a cap rate of 7.25, which is right average if you look at any of the other sales on the sales grid. They all sold with a cap rate of 7% all the way up to 7.78. So I chose 7.25 for this one. I used an average, or I'm sorry, our estimated tax rate for 2019 would have been $20 per thousand. Coming up with a value based on the income approach, both of the locations come in at $9.9 million. Now, when we look at assessing a property, we look at 3 approaches for commercial. We look at a cost, we look at an income, and we look at a sales. So both of the sales and the income, we would weight the information and then decide where best the assessed value should lie for those properties. That is the information that I have for both of the retail stores. The next portion of the packet is for their Lumberyard, which they're also appealing, but I can hold off on that if you want to have the board make a decision on the 2 retail cases first.
I think we'll do that, but that we presented into the record at this point.
Okay.
Mr. Brenner, do you have any questions for Ms. Schultz?
Do they have to be specifically questions, or can they just be comments in general? How does that work?
I'd look to Mr. Cooper, but
Questions first,
Yeah, I would
we'll
say-
have an opportunity for some rebuttal.
Right. so at this point, it would be just technical questions on the presentation that has been made, and we'll give you opportunities to make comments in the summary.
Okay. I guess I don't have any specific questions. I guess maybe just one question in general. It's more of a general question, and I'll comment on this a little bit further on. But it seems to me that, and I'll address why I still believe it's an arm length sale for the Menards sale in Madison, despite the couple things that were brought up. But I wanted to ask, isn't that still a better comp than Menards in Madison than using properties that are generating rent income, because people are buying those properties based off that rental income? So I know you're using estimated numbers to come up with vacancy rates and cap rates and things like that all change from property to property based on their rental income, the tenant, the condition of the building, all of those things. While the Menards and the comps that we got in the stores here in town, there's no income coming, so we're not using that approach. But the sale in Madison of the Menards store is what it is. It says exactly how much that building is worth. So wouldn't that be a better comp yet than the income approach of these other buildings?
Ms. Schultz?
In my opinion, no. I feel that if a sale is restricted in a deed, they're not able to use the property the way they choose. So if a Lowe's or a Home Depot or a Target chose to purchase one of your stores, they couldn't. So no, I would not say that I would rather use a Menards vacant store as a better comp. And based on talking with the assessor in that municipality, who also said it would not be used as a comparable property for our Wisconsin Department of Revenue's ratio study, then no, I wouldn't use it.
Okay.
Carter, do you have any other questions for the assessor?
Nope, that's it.
Does the board of review have any questions for Ms. Schultz?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Looking at the 8 comparable sales, I guess the first question would be, how did you discover those 8 comparable sales?
Ms. Schultz?
The sales that I discovered for the 8 comps of this property, we use a software called CoStar. When I pull up CoStar, I then make a phone call to all the assessors to make sure they were also used as valid sales.
Second question is, do you have, out of the 8 comparable sales, do you have a sale or, let's say, a couple of sales that you would determine that would be most comparable?
I would say comp 1 would be comparable. I would also say comp 5 would be comparable. And I think comp 4, after speaking with that assessor, would also be, if I were to choose 3, the most comparable, yeah.
Thank you. And then the last question I have is, looking at the 8 sales, I presume they are arm's length transactions based on evidence that you found. What evidence did you find? How did you go about determining whether these are in fact arm's length transactions?
I called all of the assessors or spoke with their staff, which was actually difficult in the last few days.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Hofer, did you also have a question or clarification?
Over here, I think this mic can pick me up okay. You mentioned there wasn't a recent sale of the subject property, so your primary method of valuation was recent comparable sales. You looked at the recent comparable sales provided by the property owner, including that Menards in the Madison area, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you determined that was not an arm's length sale and was not a reasonable comparable property, if I understand correctly, because a deed restriction is puts abnormal pressure on the buyer and devalues the property?
Correct.
Okay. And then you said, or I think I heard the property owner say that property had been vacant for some time. Do you know how long it had been vacant?
No.
He said he thought it was somewhere around a year. Would that impact your analysis as well if you were to try to use that as a comparable property?
If I were to try to use it, yes.
And you said you use the income approach simply to confirm your analysis that you used of sales of comparable properties?
Correct.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Mr. Brenner, do you have any further additional testimony that you'd like to provide to the record on this property?
Yeah, I just wanted to say two more comments. One was the loan for $9.2 million that was taken out to buy the property. I actually think that shows more that these big boxes the values just aren't there anymore. Because in order to reuse these big boxes, you can't just put a building into it and a business into it and make use out of it. You got to do some additions and renovations and change these big boxes around, whether you split them up into multi-tenant strip centers, which seems to be the biggest course of action this year. You got to put up demising walls. You got to separate utilities. There's a lot of costs that go into it. So to reuse a big box is very difficult. And I think you see that by, the number of big box vacancies that we see in town here today, and not just in town in Eau Claire, but, throughout the state. So I think, just the fact they had to take out another 1.2 million on top of the purchase price, whatever they ended up taking that out to, I think it also shows that, you need to revamp these boxes and they're not as valuable as everyone thinks they might be. And for the deed restrictions, I know people bring this up a lot, and I don't understand how this can just completely negate an arm's length transaction. The plumbers union they don't care about a home improvement restriction. You think that really impacted how much they paid for this building because they may not sell to Home Depot or Lowe's? I just think that's just crazy. Home Depot and Lowe's are already in town, and they don't want our boxes anyways. Their stores are completely different than ours. And there's so many other things to use this for. So the deed restriction, I don't feel that's a legitimate reason to disqualify a sale from being an arm's length transaction in a comparable property. But I think that's essentially what I feel on that point. And then, I just feel that the comps that have rent income they're not the right things to use because it's all speculative. Cap rates differ drastically from year to year, month to month, even week to week. Your tenants, they may have a 15-year lease, but I mean, we've seen plenty of tenants go bankrupt here in the last however long. So there's a calculated risk that investors have when they buy these income producing properties. And the Menards stores here in town are not, Menards doesn't get any income from it. It's Menards stores. So I just don't feel that they are as quite as applicable in terms of using as comps, especially when we have the three big box stores that the appraisal that we had done was using. And it's the first time I realized that one of the comp prices might be wrong, so I will definitely address that with my assessor. But I think that concludes my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Brenner. Mr. Hofer, you want to be recognized?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Mr. Brenner, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect. Okay. We heard testimony earlier that Menards agreed as part of a settlement that the Claremont property was worth, which had an assessed value of $9,409,000 for the tax years 2017, 2018, and 2019. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that Menards agreed that the valuation for the 3619 South Hastings store for the tax years 2017, 2018, and 2019 was $10,609,000. Is that correct?
Sorry, say that one more time.
What was it without?
It-
That was with 2 and 3. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Number different than mine.
What was the without the lumberyard? Sorry.
Nick, do you mind if I speak for a second?
Go ahead.
The appraisals that were done for Menards included the lumberyard and the retail store together. So that 10 million never separated the values out.
I guess, my question, I want to give you an opportunity to address. Menards agreed on those valuations for 2017, 2018, and 2019. What changed between 2019 and 2020 that would result in a valuation more than 10% less than what you agreed it was worth the year before?
Well, I think the market changes. The market changes every year, you see that too because the city reassesses everything every few years. I think it's every 3 years. So the market changed. New comps came available that better show the true value, and that's always changing. In a couple of years it might be different too, good or bad. We just try to make sure that we're using the best assessment as we can every year, and I think that's why we're here today.
So you believe the market dropped the value of the of those properties more than 10% in a year?
Well, I don't know for sure if what we agreed to was the perfect assessment. It probably was a little high yet, but we had better comps this year, and that's why we wanted to address it again this year.
Okay, and you said you believe that Madison area Menards was the best comparable sale.
Well, I think all three were very good comparable sales, just because of the fact that it's a former Menards building, very similar, almost the exact same square footage. Yeah, it does tend to lend a little bit better hand in terms of what's the best comparable.
Now, that one had been vacant, you said you thought approximately a year. Are either of these two subject buildings vacant?
They are not.
Okay, and that one in Madison has a deed restriction. Do either of these two subject properties have any kind of deed restriction?
They wouldn't because we're still operating home improvement, so.
Okay, and you said you don't believe a deed restriction which restricts and prohibits certain types of uses which potential buyers may put the property to does not impact, should not impact the assessed value of the property? Or shouldn't impact whether it's a good comparable sale?
Yeah, I don't think that the fact that a deed restriction would completely take out an arm's length transaction and negate it from a comparable sale is correct. Especially given the use and the person buying the building. There's deed restrictions on so many different properties. Residential, commercial, industrial. People and a buyer is going to come by that, regardless of that deed restriction or not. And this building was not on the market very long, and I think that shows that the deed restriction didn't impact that very much, if at all.
What do you think the impact of a deed restriction should be in terms of whether or not it's a valid comp? It just shouldn't matter. It just shouldn't even be considered.
Well, I think it's definitely a case-by-case basis, but I don't think that it should be completely taken off the table just because there's one on there.
I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Ms. Schultz, do you have any additional testimony you'd like to add?
No.
And Mr. Brenner, would you care to summarize your case for the board?
Yeah, so I guess the summarization is that Menards feels that the properties are overassessed based on current market conditions. To prove that point, to provide evidence to that point, appraisals were done by Valuation Services, Inc. To conduct a market research of the area and to come up with a market value for the properties. Based on those assessed or those appraisals, Our appraisal thought that the store should be valued at $8,400,000, both properties. So that is what Menards is looking at, and that is what we are asking the city to reduce the property taxes to.
Thank you, Mr. Brenner. Ms. Schultz, does the assessor's office would like to make a brief summary?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Then at this time, I would like to close the testimony for this case, and I will open it up for deliberations in this case by asking the Board of Review members to state, based upon their sworn testimony presented, whether the assessor's valuation is correct or incorrect, with a just brief reminder of some information that was provided earlier. And again, it's kind of a summary point of view that the assessor's valuation of the property is to be considered correct and is binding on the Board of Review. In the absence of evidence showing that it is incorrect, and that the Board of Review cannot change any value fixed by the assessor except upon evidence, and only evidence that was presented here today by people under oath, and that the evidence must be factual in nature and that may not be information. So at this point, I would open it up to the Board, bless you, Board of Review for
I just have a couple of comments about the evidence presented. I do think that the property owner, the appraisal, that the particular comp that was indicated as the best comp with the deed restrictions, I do think is questionable as far as it being an arm's length transaction. I think that is important. Also, I did want to mention that the appraisal actually was done by a Robert Watson, and we were not speaking with Robert Watson this morning. It would have been, I think, they could have provided better information if Mr. Watson would have been available this morning for questions. With that, any other comments?
yes. Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you. To me, the litigation that set this value at $9,000,000 that was recently approved by Menard, to me is very solid evidence that they believed at one point they believed the value and have not provided evidence that would show a degradation in the property value in this amount.
Thank you. Any other deliberation from the Board of Review? Okay, then I would entertain the motion, and Mr. Hooper, just for the board, since this is our first one this morning, could you perhaps guide us on the structure that you'd like to see the motion in?
I think the motion should be a motion to grant the objection. It gets confusing and awkward if it's a motion to deny, even if you're going to vote no, and then have the grounds. I'm going to take that back. I think a motion to grant or deny, if you're going to have a motion to deny, include the grounds for the denial with specificity. If others believe, for example, that a motion to deny or a motion to grant should be supported by additional grounds, might I suggest that you ask for a friendly motion to amend that motion to include those grounds as well. But simply saying grant or deny by itself is not sufficient. You want to have in the motion a record of why you made the decision that you did.
Could it also be just a motion to uphold the assessment as presented and the reasons why
Yes.
we're upholding it?
Yeah, I think that would be better. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. So it would be a motion to affirm the assessor's assessment of the said property and then your reason as to why you're upholding it, or it's a motion to grant the requesters request for the adjustment in the appraisal for assessment and then why. So either one, right? So
Yeah.
A motion to grant the assessor's assessment or a motion to grant the appeal and why for either one.
And if you grant, again, if you grant the appeal, it's for the amount that the property owner has requested. There isn't we're going to split the difference type of motion. It's either upholding the assessment as stated or the objector's value as stated.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hofer. So at this point, I would entertain either a motion to accept the city assessor's valuation of the property and your rationale, or a motion to grant the objector's request to adjust the assessment and your rationale.
I make a motion. Yes, thank you. I make a motion that we sustain the assessment. The assessor is presumed correct. I believe that the property owner, in presenting the appraisal, did not override that presumption of correctness. I believe there are some issues with, particular, the best comp goals according to the appraiser and for the property owner. And I also believe that the assessor presented a sales comparison approach which supported the assessment. So I make a motion to sustain the assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. We have a motion to sustain the assessment as presented this morning. Do we have a second for that?
I second.
Mr. Arnett seconds that. Any discussion on the motion for the board? Roll call vote. Yes.
On a friendly amendment, I would ask that the litigation be mentioned in the motion that the property owner has agreed to very recently to property value amendment.
Is that accepted?
I have a bit of an issue with that because every assessment year stands on its own. And what has happened in the past is in the past. And we are evaluating as of January 1st, 2020. And I believe that the information that was presented today as far as evidence for the valuation of the property should be solely what we're reviewing and taking into account today.
So you're withdrawing here? Thank you. So we have the motion before us. We have a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, then we'll do a roll call vote on the motion to sustain the assessor's valuation for property 14-1284-G and property parcel 15-3504-D. Clerk.
Board Member Anderson,
Aye.
Ingram,
Aye.
Arnett,
Aye.
Christopherson,
Aye.
Jansen,
Aye.
Peters,
Aye.
Riegel. Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. We move on then to our next appeal. Would the clerk please introduce that appeal?
The third appeal is for Menard Inc. for the property located at 3619 South Casey Way, parcel number 15-3504-E. This property is referred to as the Lumberyard. The land value is $680,000. The improvement is $520,000. And the total assessed value is $1,200,000.
Thank you. And so this morning, I believe we would have Mr. Brenner. Are you here again this morning to bring this appeal forward?
I am still here.
Okay, good. Thank you. Again, I would just remind you that the Board of Review wants you to understand that under state law, the Board of Review is required to uphold the assessor's valuation of your property as being correct unless your testimony can show that the assessor's valuation is incorrect. In other words, the burden of proof is upon you as a taxpayer, and you understand that.
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. People, do we need to swear him in again for this, or will that stand for this hearing?
We can just probably ask that they understand they're still under oath.
Okay, Mr. Brenner, do you understand that you're still under oath?
I do.
Thank you. And if you could, for the record, if you could enter or please state your name and the address of the property that you're appealing this morning, as and that what you feel the fair market value of the property is, as well as the property that is stated by the assessor.
Okay. Nick Brenner, real estate representative, Menard Inc. Property we're talking about now is located at 3619 Hastings Way in Eau Claire. So this is the parcel that is that contains our drive-through lumber shed on the east side store in the back. So this is a pretty unique structure. It's really built for Menard's use, not much use other than lumber storage. It is non-climate controlled. It's open air. Both the ends and the front are open air. There's no plumbing. There's some electrical for the lights. There's no office space. There's nothing of that sort. Essentially, it is a storage shed. So with that being said, the assessed value of this is $1.2 million. That again is felt that is extremely high for I think about 6 acres and a lumber shed with poor visibility and poor access. Right now we are getting access through the store, but this is a separate parcel. If the store ever sold, this parcel would then lose that access and would have to go through essentially the townhomes and residential subdivision to the north. There is a small strip of land retained for access for that purpose. So in order to provide evidence of the value or to get a better idea of the value of this property, we hired the same firm, Valuation Services, Inc., to conduct an appraisal for this particular property and building. That appraisal came back and had a appraised value of $610,000 for this property. And what he did was go through and figure out that the best use of this property is for a lumber yard. Makes sense because it's a lumber shed, really no other purpose for that building other than a lumber shed. So he went through and found a few comps throughout Wisconsin of recent lumber yard sales to figure out exactly, what you could expect from a sale of a property like this. And those sales really adjusted, from 500,000, 580,000 and 300,000, just under. What's unique about all those all have an office and showroom available to them. So they are a building that you are able to go and work in right away. The building here at Menards isn't like that. There's no plumbing, there's no heat, there's nothing. So in order to utilize this as a business, an addition would have to be added on. It's not an immediate thing unless for some reason you have a surplus of lumber that you would like to store, which I think is very, unrealistic. So that is the method that the appraiser used to value this property. I still think there's an argument that could be made that if this parcel were to be sold and split off, you probably would end up demoing this building, and therefore probably the best use would be residential to add on to those townhomes, just because there's really not much use for this building other than to utilize it for the operation of the Menards store. Most of our competitors, they don't utilize lumber sheds like this either. So it actually becomes becomes somewhat of a detriment to the valuation of the property because it's a maintenance nightmare that people don't want to handle and take on. Same thing, I use analogy a lot to a swimming pool for a residential house. Yeah, there's some money there that people put in to put in their swimming pool, but swimming pools, I think, are fairly, thought of as not increasing the value of your home. And some people would argue that it would actually decrease the value because people don't want to maintain them. They don't want the headache. It very limits your and narrows your buying pool. That is essentially, a lot of what this lumber building is. Sure, it's a structure. Absolutely. It costs money to build, but it doesn't have a lot of value. And I think that appraisal really sets this forth. And, that's essentially what we're asking for is to agree with the appraisal of 610,000.
Thank you, Mr. Brenner. And it kind of faded off at the end there, but just to clarify, you're asking for the assessment to be adjusted from $1,200,000 to $610,000.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Schultz, are you representing the attorney for the assessor's office in this case? Do you have any questions for Mr. Brenner? Indicating that there's no questions from the assessor's office of Mr. Brenner. Does the board of review have any questions for Mr. Brenner? Seeing none, then Mr. Brenner, do you have any witnesses that you would like to present to support your case?
Just me.
Okay, thank you. Then, Ms. Schultz, would you like to present the city assessor's office case? Thank you. And Ms. Schultz, could you just confirm that you're still under oath?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so the same packet that I had passed around earlier is still the same packet that we will use for the lumber shed case. Starting on page 5. Background on this property, this was also part of our litigation. Menards had an appraisal done that included this value into the retail value of the South store on Hastings Way also. What I find very interesting about this property is the property is placed directly behind where their retail store is. And you can see on the aerial photo that I have on page 5, where the red stars is where their retail location is. Directly to the north of that is where their lumberyard is. You can see it is surrounded by some multifamily property. And we're all from Eau Claire, so we also know what the retail is down there also. What's interesting about this property is it's primarily zoned C3, which means it's available and ready to use without any zoning regulations for a commercial property. It's one of the highest zonings that we have here in the city of Eau Claire. So based on that information, the land alone has its highest use. There is about 2 acres of this parcel. So this parcel is about 6.26 acres large. 2 acres of it is zoned residential 3-family, which is a higher residential zoning to be used for properties that want to build a multifamily property. It's one of our highest uses for residential. Now, Menards needed that location right behind the retail store and chose to put a lumberyard on a property zoned commercial. In my comps that I have in my case, the properties are all on industrial zoned land. So typically you would see a lumber shed or a lumberyard placed on industrial zoning, not the highest zoning in a city municipality. If you go to page 6, there are two analyses I had done on this property. The top one is of Lumberyard comparable properties in Wisconsin. And the lower one is of land sales alone without any improvements. So I'll go through the top grid first. Comp 1, 1700 Western Avenue, Lyman Lumber here in Eau Claire. In September 2017, it sold for $2,781,063. Cost per square foot would be $71.19. Comp 2 is 876 US Highway 12 in Hudson, sold for $1,6,107,000. August of 2018 is when it sold. It sold for $97.53. Comp 3, 9545 South 80th Street in Franklin, Wisconsin, sold for $1.4 million. Cost per square foot was $97.55. And the fourth comp is land here in Eau Claire that is sold, and it has mini storages on it. So ideally, it's not the exact same use as a lumberyard like Menards, but it's also not heated, and they're storage units of close to the same size of where the lumber yard is that Menards has their property on. This was at 229 Moore Street in Eau Claire. Menards sold this property to U-Haul for $1 million in 2018, which is a cost per square foot of $24.36. That was actually the old tennis center, if anyone remembers that U-Haul has now purchased it. So Menards sold that property for $24.36 to U-Haul. And the appraisal that was prepared for Menards is suggesting a value of almost $10 per square foot for their lumber shed. If I look at the land sales comps in the lower grid, I just kind of want you to pay attention to where the sales are here. So comp 1 is in Eau Claire, 2615 Craig Road. This is a commercial use property for 1.3 acres large, so smaller than where the amount of commercial zoning is for the retail, or I'm sorry, for the lumber yard. It's sold for $700,000 as vacant, which comes down to $8.77 per square foot. Comp 2, the address was 0 Commonwealth Avenue, that's also in Eau Claire, sold for $339,500. That's 0.56 acres that was purchased. Comp 3, 0 Scully Drive, also here in Eau Claire, 3.6 acres, so still smaller than the subject by almost half, sold for $755,000. Sales comp 4, 0 East Hamilton Avenue, also vacant land. This use is not commercial. These last two comps have the same use as the residential 3-family, which is about 2 acres out of the 6 for the lumber yard. Those portions sold for $265,000, which came to $2.50. That amounts for 2 acres and about 2.5 acres. And then sales comp 5 is East Hamilton Avenue, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. That was 9.3 acres, so slightly smaller than the subject, but a smaller, or I guess I would say inferior zoning to the majority of the property, sold for $885,000. If you turn to the next page, page 7, I want you to look at where the red star is, that's where the lumber yard is, And sales 4 and 5 are about 2 blocks directly behind where Menards property of the Lumberyard sits. Sale 5 is zoned R3, not commercial, but R3. That property alone sold for $885,000. So when I look at Menards appraisal, for a $610,000 value for land that is superior to sale 5, I can't adjust the value to $610,000 knowing that I have a sale of about the same acreage an inferior zoning to drop it below where it currently is. So based on those sale comps of lumberyards in Wisconsin and all vacant land sales here located in Eau Claire only, I think the value where we have it is right now where it should be. Also, I'd like to point out that Menards comp on the appraisal, all the comps were for $500,000, $290,000, and $588,000. I would say 80% of the comps that we have here in Eau Claire on vacant land alone are higher than the comps that were used for the appraisal.
That concludes your case?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Brenner, do you have any questions for Ms. Schultz on the case that you just presented?
Yeah, I got a couple. So one on the building comps that you had, is each one of those buildings, are they climate controlled? Do they have office showroom space? Are they essentially, can you occupy that as a business from the day that you buy it?
Lyman Lumber, yes. You could have occupied it the day that you bought it. Hudson, yes. Comp 3 in Franklin, yes. And comp 4, Menards sold to U-Haul. Could they have occupied it? Probably not, because the use changed from being a tennis center to mini storage by U-Haul.
Okay. But that's a fully enclosed structure, right? So that would increase the value as opposed to an open air structure like we have in the lumberyard.
What would increase the value?
The fact that it's fully enclosed, sealed away from the elements.
Right. Yep, it would.
Okay. And then the other question is, so I understand you said that part of the yard is zone commercial, one of the highest commercial zones that the city has. Would the city be okay, and you may not be able to answer this, but would the city be okay using any sort of commercial, using that access drive through the residential?
I know that that's a question we could ask.
Okay.
For this board.
Okay. Those were the only two questions I have, and I'll just address some more comments later on.
Thank you, Mr. Brenner. Does the board of review have any questions? Okay, hearing none then. Mr. Brenner, do you have any additional testimony that you'd like to add at this time?
Yeah, I just want to address a couple things that were brought up. I can't stress access on this enough. This parcel gets separated off. It's got terrible access. You can use all the zones, all the other comps you want for commercial ground. I don't know. I didn't get sent those before this meeting, so I don't know exactly where they are. I would have to imagine the access for each of those lots are going to be superior to this one. And I just can't believe that these residential houses to the north and or the city for that matter are going to be on board putting a Chick-fil-A or something like that in the back of this property and having all that traffic drive right through their townhomes. And I can't even imagine Chick-fil-A wanting to go there, any really commercial wanting to go there, because there's no visibility. And the access is terrible. So yeah, it may be zoned commercial, but zoning isn't everything. It's the practicality of the property that comes into play as well. The other statement that was said as well was that we have these vacant residential sales that are as much as the comps in our book and what we're asking for this property to be assessed at. The issue with that is, depending on what the vacant land is, again, I don't know it very well. I wasn't sent before, but you don't have to demo anything to get to build your structures. Yeah, there's some grading that you have to do. But if you want to build residential on this parcel, you have all the demo costs that come with it. You're going to have to tear down the building, you have to rip up the pavement, you're going to have to rip out storm lines, you're going to have to redo your detention pond. That's the other thing too. There's a retention pond on part of this property. So that essentially makes that property worthless. So there's a lot of things that go into the value of a property other than just zoning. And I get zoning is very important and it does help, give you the assessed value, but it's just one prong of looking at the value of a property. And then the last point I'd just like to make is that this building, if you want to operate a business out of here and you want to have your offices here, you're going to have to add something. You can't just use this building to start up a lumber shed without having any bathrooms, without, the plumbing necessary for all of that, or heating. There's no gas out here. It is simply unclimate controlled. It's got electrical. That's what it's got. So there is a lot of improvements that would need to happen to this parcel to really make it worth anything. And as I stated before, the best use may be just to demo it all, which costs money. So I think it's a unique property in that aspect. I think there's a lot of different attitudes that have to be taken to it. But I feel the appraisal did the best job that it could to come to that conclusion and come up with the value.
Thank you, Mr. Brenner. Ms. Schultz, do you have any additional testimony that they added to the record?
I guess I would say if I were to look at a property that was $885,000, that was an inferior zoning amount just to the north, selling for $885,000, which is higher than where the appraisal suggests that the land should be. Demoing an open air structure with no plumbing, no utilities other than electric to it, is not going to be any more than what it would cost to run that to a property that was also vacant to improve it.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Mr. Brenner, would you like to provide a brief summary of your case to the board? Mr. Brenner?
Oh, sorry, you cut out there. What was that?
Oh, would you like to provide a brief summary then of your case to the board?
Yeah, sure. I think we reevaluated the property. We got an appraisal to help provide what the value of 2020 should be. That appraisal came back at a valuation of $610,000, and that is where the company believes the property should be assessed at.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, a brief summary of the case?
No.
Okay then. With no more testimony coming before the board at this point in time, I'm now closing the testimony of the case. We're going to open up to deliberations, the board of review. Members may state their deliberation based upon the sworn testimony that's been presented, whether it be from the assessor's valuation as correct or incorrect. So with that, I would open it up to the board of review again for any deliberation, and then hopefully that deliberation will result in a motion either to affirm the assessor's assessment of the property or to grant the objectors a request to adjust the property. I want you to turn off your light, and then that's a way to help you recognize when you're wanting to. Any deliberation from the board of review? Yes, Mr. Jansen.
Yes, the only thing I would mention is that it appears that both the assessor and the property owner have presented a sales comparison approach. And at this point, we know that the assessor is presumed correct per law. And Therefore, it would be difficult for us to decide which sales comparison approach may be more accurate. I do want to point out one thing that the assessor brought up, which I find very interesting, and that is the land value. And it does look like, according to the assessor's analysis, that the land in that area is quite valuable, particularly when you look at the indicated value from the property owner, where the opinion of value is $610,000, and we look at the assessor's analysis of the land by itself, which almost covers that $610,000. I'll just leave it at that comments right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Any other comments or deliberation by the board of review? And hearing none and not seeing a hand by Ms. Anderson on the electronic format, I would certainly entertain a motion either to uphold the assessor's valuation or to grant the objective. Yes, Mr. Arnett.
I'd make a motion to uphold the assessment.
Could I trouble you to perhaps give a little bit of your rationale for why that motion has been brought forward?
I just believe that Ms. Schultz is with it showing comparing the comps, and also the land valuation in and around that particular property is showing that I think the assessment is been pretty fair.
We have a motion before the board to uphold the assessor's valuation. Is that a second by Ms. Christopherson? Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion about the motion? And Ms. Repo, could we call the question?
Board Member England,
Aye.
Arnett,
Aye.
Christopherson,
Aye.
Jansen,
Aye.
Peters,
Aye.
Riegel, aye, Anderson.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. And Mr. Brenner, thank you for your time this morning. You're certainly welcome to stay on the call for other appeals. But thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Before we move on to we have one other timely appeal that is before us, and then two that requested after the required 48 hours, which will take up. We are pushing 2 hours for this meeting, so I would just prepare to move on, but it could also take a brief recess if anybody needs that. Anybody need a recess before we move on? Okay, just wanted to ask. Then let's move on to our next request for an appeal. Would the clerk please read that into the record?
The appeal is Covenant Healthcare of Eau Claire, located at 1405 Truax Boulevard, parcel number 14-1273. The land is assessed at $724,500. The improvements at $6,150,300. The total assessed value is $6,876,800.
Thank you for that. And on behalf of this appeal, do we have who do we have online that is bringing this appeal forward? Do I need to unmute?
Russell Carton. Towards the bottom. Yes.
Yep. I see he has his hand up. Mr. Carnes, are you with us this morning? Mr. Carnes, you should be unmuted. No, I don't. Should be able to hear Mr. Carnes. Mr. Carnes, are you there? That is not why we shouldn't hear him.
He may need to call in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, he's unmuted here, but you're right. I mean, the microphone on his own machine might be turned off. Do we have a phone number then that Mr. Carnes could call in on?
The agenda.
Mr. Carnes, we give you an opportunity, give you a phone number perhaps that you can call in on, 967, oh, I'm sorry, 1-408-418-9388. So that's 1-408-418-9388. And then the access code is 967-205-159. And we'll give you a moment to try to make that phone call. Yeah. Is there any other thoughts on how to get Mr. Carnes on here? Not seeing any other phone calls. And perhaps what I would ask is, what? Okay. Appreciate everybody's patience as we work through this technology. People, have you received some correspondence from him?
Yeah, I am emailing him. The access code is not working, but I'm sending it to him.
Okay.
He's on the phone line now. Can you unmute him?
Okay.
Call in user 5, I guess.
Number 5, right here.
Hi, this is Attorney Russell Carnes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome. Thank you for your persistence in being able to join us this morning.
Yeah, I apologize. It seems to be some problem with the WebEx interface that wouldn't let me, you could not hear me even though I was speaking, so I apologize for that.
But we figured you were trying hard, so again, thanks for being able to join us this morning, and apologize for that challenge in getting in. Why don't we start out then by swearing you in? So, Ms. Riegel, could you swear Mr. Carnes into the record?
Do you solemnly swear that you are Russell Carnes and that the testimony which you shall give in the matter now on hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Carnes. And again, good morning. The Board of Review wants you to understand that under state law, the Board of Review is required to uphold the assessor's valuation of your property as being correct, unless you are able, by your testimony, to show that the assessor's valuation is incorrect. In other words, the burden of proof is upon you as a taxpayer. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Thank you. Then could I ask you for the record to state your full name and your address, the address of the property in question, and then would you also state, in your opinion, what is the fair market value of the property that is before us this morning?
Yes, thank you. My name is Attorney Russell Carnes. That's Karnes. I'm with the Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown law firm. We represent both Walmarts and Sam's Incorporated. I believe the parcel that is currently before the board is 15-3519. That's at 3915 Gateway Drive. It's the Walmart location in Eau Claire. We did submit.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we thought this was 14-1273, the Dove Covenant on Truex Boulevard.
Oh, I do not. I apologize, and I do not represent Covenant. I'm not here for that property.
Okay.
There may have been some loss in translation there when I was trying to call in.
Okay. Then I'm sorry. Then we misidentified. So you're representing the Sam's Club and the Walmart properties. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then I would look to Mr. Holford to, we find ourselves having opened up a hearing on that somebody had invited the wrong person in.
Well, in Attorney Carnes, I think Attorney Carnes is here for the consideration of late filing,
Right.
which is next on our agenda. I'd recommend seeing if we can identify the representative for
14-1273.
yes, see if they're on the line, and then we can take up Mr. Carnes in a minute. But knowing that when we do, we've now resolved any technical issues for hearing him.
All right, thank you. Mr. Carnes, if we could just ask you to wait patiently just a little bit more, and we will take up your request as soon as we have completed the hearing for 14-1273.
No problem.
Thank you. So as we're looking for the representative, which our paperwork says is from Whitley, for 14-1273. Do we have anybody on the call? If you are, can you raise your hand? If you're on the call to represent property 14-1273. Please raise your hand. Could just go through the people. I mean, I could ask each of the people that are on the call. We don't have many.
Yeah,
You want me to do that?
you can. I'm not showing that they're on the phone.
Okay. Because we could have someone theoretically that doesn't know how to raise it.
Right.
with me. Mr. Millis, I see you're on a call. Is there any chance that you're here to represent property 141273?
I don't think so. It's, I'm just interested in the proceedings.
All right, thank you. Mr. Winky, are you to represent the property 14-1273? Okay, not hearing from that. We only have two others. Ms. Turnquist, are you here to represent the property parcel 14-1273?
She said he's going crazy because he just wants to go back.
I would think that's a no.
I have a phone number for them.
Yeah, if you would. And then Ms. Sullivan, do you by any chance, are you on this call to represent parcel 14-1273? Ms. Sullivan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
No, I'm just one of the property assessors for the city, so I'm just viewing the meeting.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've asked everyone who's on the call, and we do not have anybody here. Mr. Hofer, is your suggestion that we continue to wait, process it without the applicant here, or?
My recommendation is that in the absence of having a representative present here in the proceedings, that the Board of Review uphold the assessment as stated, since there's no contrary evidence to overcome the presumption that the assessment is correct. And having taken, I think, made many reasonable attempts to try to confirm whether someone was present or not, and finding no one present, that's my recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. If you want to wait just a moment, the clerk is, just for the record, shows that the clerk is also trying to make a phone call, on record, to see if we can make further contact. How did that phone call?
I called the two numbers that we have for the representatives, and there is no answer.
Okay, thank you. So having gone through and opened up the phone line for everyone that was on the call, and having made calls to the two phone numbers that we have on record, we do not have anybody here present this morning to present the case to appeal the assessment for 14-1273, which is 1405 Truax Boulevard. With the failure of the applicant to appeal or present their appeal this morning, I would entertain a motion to uphold the assessment as presented in the assessment roll for property 14-1273 from any one of the members of the Board of Review.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Strauss.
I move to uphold the assessed value based on the complainant's failure to provide any evidence.
We have a motion to uphold. Is there a second? Second. A second by Mr. Arnett. Any further discussion? Yes, Ms. Riebel.
So I did provide you an appraisal we received from the via email with their objection. So I don't.
Okay, so we have received some documentation, but I would ask Mr. Hofer, I believe it would be non-admissible because we don't have anybody here to testify to that under oath, the validity of that document taken into consideration. Is that correct?
Correct. The board is only to consider sworn testimony, and because in the absence of sworn testimony, there is no evidence contrary to the assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. So we have a motion and a second before us to uphold the city assessor's valuation of property 14-1273. Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing that then, Ms. Riepel, could you please call the roll?
Board Member Arnett,
Aye.
Christopherson. Aye. Jansen,
Aye.
Peters,
Aye.
Riepel. Aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Anglem.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much for your work on that and for everybody's patience. So that brings us to we have received 2 requests for an appeal, but they were presented to us after the 48 hours that is required for an appeal. And here. I would like to point out that property owner who files during the first 2 hours of the Board of Appeal, but failure to meet the 48-hour notice must present good cause in order for the Board of Review to take up that appeal. So, Mr. Holbrook, could I ask you for some definition and perspective on what good cause is and how we should evaluate that when we are looking at this request for appeal on properties 15-3519A and 15-3519?
Sure. The statute does not define good cause, but again, requires, if that 48-hour deadline is not met, for the applicant to demonstrate good cause. Now, I would submit to you that if good cause meant simply an oversight or got busy and forgot, that requirement would mean nothing. And so I think it's something more than just a simple oversight or a simple mistake or inadvertence. They have to show good cause for why that deadline was not met. And it's up to you as a board and your discretion to determine whether or not they've made that showing, but the burden is on them to demonstrate that there was good cause for missing that deadline.
Okay, thank you. And if I recall, we did swear in Mr. Carnes already, right? So, but Mr. Carnes, are you still on the line with us?
I'm still on the line.
Good to know. Thank you. So before we decide to take up your case or not, could you help us understand why you had good cause for filing late?
Sure, and I'll just address both of these parcels together. Once again, this is Russell Carnes from Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown. We did file our objections on both of these parcels yesterday by email with the clerk. One of the ways that we track these Board of Review hearings statewide is by using the State of Wisconsin Department of Revenue's website. And they maintain a calendar for all municipalities for the Board of Review hearings, which is regularly updated. And in fact, there's a place where you can insert your email address and submit a form, municipality by municipality. And as soon as the Board of Review hearing is updated on that website, it triggers an email to the person who entered their email address. Our paralegal in our office did that. I don't recall the date that she entered her email address, but she never received a notice that it was updated. And in fact, I'm on the website at this moment. It's still not updated. It says there's no information. We do track these year to year, and the hearings are usually around the same time every year, but it can change week to week depending on when the days fall during the week. So we did attempt to contact the clerk this week, and my paralegal was successful, just to follow up on a hearing date, and found out yesterday that the hearing was actually today, and we did submit our objection forms along with requests for waiver of these hearings. And the reason why that's important is these cases are both pending litigation. The Walmart case is a Clare County case number 18CV352, and then the Sam's case is 19CV367. We're in actual negotiations with the city's council right now to settle these cases. The Walmart one, we've kind of finalized a settlement in principle, but we're still going back and forth on the final agreement. And the Sam's case, we're still exchanging emails and offers with the city's council, who is Matt Fleming at Murphy Desmond. So I think given the fact that we, did what we could with the Department of Revenue's website to try to obtain the hearing date information, and that wasn't updated, would demonstrate good cause. So I would respectfully request that the Board of Review accept these objections and then also consider the waiver of the hearing that was also presented to the clerk yesterday.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carnes. Are there any questions for Mr. Carnes on his request to have the objection waived and brought before us? Yes, Mr. Arnett.
I just have a question. The Department of Revenue was the Board of Review date of May 21st for Eau Claire's on there? Ms. Riegel?
It is not on there, and the city of Eau Claire has historically not listed the date on that website.
Ms. Riegel. Any further questions for Mr. Carnes? I have one. Mr. Carnes, your firm is a professional firm that it represents businesses that are making appeals of their assessment as a regular course of your business?
That is one part of our practice, yes. We are a full service law firm, so we do all kinds of other legal work, but that is one practice that my firm does, yes.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Hofer, I would look for some guidance on how to structure the motion for this, if it should be a motion to waive, but go up or down, or should it be a motion? You could give us some guidance on what it should be, an affirmative or a motion in the negative.
The motion should be to either grant or deny the waiver of the 48-hour notice requirement.
Okay.
And should include grounds for either. I would add, based on what I've heard, the city attorney's office recommendation would be to deny the request. The meeting was properly noticed. You heard testimony from our clerk that we don't, as a matter of course, include our information on the DOJ website. It is a professional law firm, one of the, if I may say, one of the more sophisticated litigation firms in the state, with a long record, not only on these types of matters, but on all kinds of litigation matters. This isn't an unsophisticated residential property owner with no experience in these matters. And so for all those reasons, it's the city attorney's office's opinion that they did not make a showing of good cause, and we'd recommend denying that request.
I understand that you're asking, you should be a motion to either grant or deny the request to appeal the assessment of parcels 15-3519-A and 15-3519.
Correct.
I would entertain either of those motions on the board review. You need to go one way or the other. Mr. Arnett.
I would make a motion that we deny, on the basis of Mr. Hofer's explanation, the law firm, they have other avenues to research, the board of review date. So my motion would be to deny.
You have a second for that motion. Ms. Christopherson has seconded that motion. Any discussion on that motion before the board review? Okay. Then, Ms. Riegel, could we have a roll call vote?
Board Member Christopherson,
Aye.
Jansen,
Aye.
Peters,
Aye.
Riegel, aye. Anderson,
Aye.
Anglem. Aye. Arnett.
Aye.
And then that motion passes. I believe then, having done that, Mr. Carnes, we'd like to thank you again for joining us this morning.
Yep, thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Okay, then, having considered any late filings, I do not believe that there's any other matters that are properly before the board this morning, and just looking to the clerk or to our counsel. If that's the case, then at about 10:21, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Or, what? I know.
Doug, you know how to proper
You
pronunciation.
pronounced it properly.
Sign and die.
So we are adjourning, sign and die. Okay, does anyone care to explain to the board of review what to adjourn and sign and die means, so that they're all understanding what we're taking a vote on? Okay.
Board review for 2020.
So the motion to adjourn and sign and die means that we have completed our work for the 2020 board of review. Do I have a motion to adjourn, sign and die?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn, sign and die.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Do we have a second for that? A second by Mr. Arnett. Then all those in favor of adjourning and die, say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? That motion passes, and I'd like to thank all of the board of review, the applicants who brought the objections forward, and certainly our city attorney staff and legal counsel for assisting us in with this process this morning. Thank you, and everybody have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.